The morning sun cast long shadows across Haven Valley as children ran toward the playground, their laughter echoing off the metallic walls of the colony buildings. New Terra had become humanity's pride, a world where families could start fresh among alien stars. David Reed watched from his office window as his own daughter Emma chased her friends around the swing sets, her red hair catching the golden light. 50,000 humans called this place home now. The colony had grown from a desperate outpost to a thriving community in just 8 years. Dr. Maria Santos unlocked the doors to the primary school, greeting students as they arrived for another day of learning. She had taught here since the beginning, watching children grow from toddlers to teenagers who dreamed of exploring even more distant worlds. The settlement sprawled across 15 square kilometers of fertile valley, protected by shield generators and orbital defense platforms. Earth had invested everything in making New Terra work. Massive cargo ships arrived monthly with supplies and new colonists eager to escape the overcrowded homeworld. Gardens bloomed between residential blocks while workshops hummed with activity as craftsmen built furniture and tools for the expanding population. David moved away from the window and returned to his desk where morning reports waited. The defense grid showed all systems operational. 3 patrol ships circled the planet while sensors swept for any approaching vessels. For 8 years, nothing had threatened the colony except occasional equipment failures and minor disputes between neighbors. The universe seemed vast and empty, full of possibilities rather than dangers. In orbit above New Terra, something shimmered against the star field. The distortion was subtle, invisible to human sensors that swept past without detecting anything unusual. Advanced cloaking technology bent light around massive hull plates as 15 warships positioned themselves for attack. The hegemony fleet had traveled for months to reach this remote human settlement. Supreme Commander Voss studied tactical displays from the bridge of his flagship. The reptilian officer's scaled hands moved across control surfaces as he reviewed target priorities. Schools and residential areas glowed red on his screens while military installations appeared as secondary objectives. The attack would send an unmistakable message to the expanding human plague. Maria began the daily lesson by showing her students images of Earth's oceans and mountains. 43 children sat at their desks, ages ranging from 6 to 12. They asked questions about whales and snow and cities with millions of people. Some had been born on New Terra and had never seen the homeworld except in pictures and videos. Earth existed for them as a collection of stories and dreams. The colony's communication center received routine traffic from other human settlements. Trade agreements, family messages, and scientific data flowed through subspace relays that connected the scattered worlds. Nobody noticed the brief static burst that indicated jamming systems had activated around New Terra. The subtle interference would prevent any distress signals from reaching the outside galaxy. David walked through the colony's Main Street, nodding to shopkeepers and mechanics who had become friends over the years. The bakery filled the air with the scent of fresh bread while children gathered outside the candy shop, counting coins saved from allowances. Normal life continued its familiar rhythm as it had for thousands of days since the first colonists arrived. Above them, weapon systems charged and targeting computers locked onto population centers. The hegemony had studied human settlements for months, learning their daily patterns and vulnerabilities. They knew when children would be in schools and when families gathered in common areas. The attack would maximize casualties among the youngest. Humans. Emma Reed ran across the playground with her best friend Lucy, chasing soap bubbles that drifted on the morning breeze. Other children climbed on jungle gyms and played games that their parents had taught them from Earth traditions. The sound of laughter mixed with the distant hum of atmospheric processors that kept New Terra's air breathable for human lungs. Maria checked her watch and prepared to call the children in from recess. The school day would continue with mathematics and science lessons designed to prepare these young minds for the challenges of colonial life. Some would become engineers or doctors, while others might join the exploration teams that mapped New Terra's continents. Their futures stretched ahead, With unlimited potential, the first energy beam lanced down from orbit without warning. It struck the school's east wing, vaporizing concrete and steel in a flash of superheated plasma. The explosion threw Maria against the wall as windows shattered throughout the building. Children's screams mixed with the roar of collapsing masonry. As emergency alarms began wailing across the colony, David felt the ground shake beneath his feet as more beams rained from the sky. He looked up to see brief flashes of light that marked the death of everything he had worked to build. His communicator crackled with panicked voices reporting attacks throughout Haven Valley. The playground where his daughter played erupted in flames as another orbital strike found its mark. The hegemony ships revealed themselves as their cloaking systems disengaged. Massive vessels hung in the sky like dark monuments to destruction. Their weapons fired in coordinated volleys that targeted every school, playground, and residential block where families lived. The aliens had come not to conquer but to murder. Focusing their assault on the colony's most vulnerable inhabitants, Maria crawled through the burning remains of her classroom, calling for survivors among the rubble. She found 3 children trapped under fallen beams and began digging with her bare hands. Blood ran down her face from glass cuts as she worked to free students who might still be alive. Around her, the building continued to collapse as more energy beams carved through the structure. The attack lasted 6 hours. When the hegemony fleet finally departed, Haven Valley burned under columns of black smoke that rose toward the alien stars. 18,000 humans had survived the massacre, but every child under 16 was dead. The aliens had achieved their goal with surgical precision. Sending a message written in the blood of innocence, David found Emma's body near the twisted remains of the swing set, where she had played that morning. Her red hair was dulled with ash and her small hand still clutched the toy spaceship he had given her for her birthday. Around the playground, other parents searched desperately through the debris, calling names that would never answer again. Smoke still rose from the ruins when the rescue ships arrived 3 days later. The first vessels to breach New Terra's atmosphere carried medical teams and emergency supplies, but they found a colony transformed into a graveyard. 18,000. Survivors moved like ghosts through the wreckage, searching for bodies and salvaging memories from the destruction. Dr. Maria Santos sat in what remained of her classroom, holding the charred remains of a children's book about space exploration. Her twin daughters Anne and Beth had been reading it together when the attack began. She had found their bodies holding hands under their desks, as if they had tried to comfort each other in those final moments. The image would never leave her mind. David Reed worked alongside other survivors to dig graves in the soft earth beyond the colony's perimeter. 12,000 small holes marked the resting place of every child who had called New Terra home. Parents carved names into simple wooden markers while others gathered personal belongings to bury with their lost ones. The work continued in silence, broken only by quiet sobbing and the sound of shovels breaking ground. The colony's communication array had survived the bombardment. Its hardened systems designed to withstand natural disasters, engineers restored full power within hours, establishing contact with Earth and the other human settlements scattered across known space. The first transmission was a simple message that would echo through history. They killed our children, all of them. News of the massacre spread through human space at light speed, carried by subspace relays that connected every colony and outpost. On Earth, President Williams called an emergency session of the Global Defense Council while military commanders reviewed the sparse intelligence about the attackers. The footage from New Terra's security cameras showed reptilian creatures in advanced warships, but no one recognized the species or understood their motives, Maria found herself speaking for the survivors when reporters arrived from Earth. She stood before cameras in the ruins of her school, her face marked by scars from flying glass, and her voice steady despite the grief that threatened to overwhelm her. "They came not to conquer but to murder," she said, gesturing toward the playground, where children had died. "They celebrated while our babies burned. There can be no peace with such monsters." The transmission reached every human world within days. Colonial governors watched in horror as Maria described the attack's surgical precision, how the aliens had specifically targeted areas where children gathered. The message was clear: humanity's expansion into space would be met with the systematic slaughter of their youngest generation. The threat demanded a response that matched its brutality. Earth's reaction began within hours of receiving the first reports. Military production facilities that had operated at minimal capacity for decades suddenly roared to life as workers returned to assembly lines. Shipyards that built cargo vessels and exploration ships retooled their equipment to construct warships. The peaceful expansion that had characterized human space travel for generations ended with the smoke rising from Haven Valley. David led the survivors in building a memorial where the playground had stood. They used stones from New Terra's mountains to create a simple monument listing every child's name. 12,000 names carved in granite. From 6-year-old Amy, who had loved drawing pictures of unicorns, to 15-year-old Mike, who had planned to become a starship pilot. Each name represented dreams that would never be fulfilled. The Global Defense Council met in continuous session as reports arrived from across human space. Every military officer who had served in the colonial forces was recalled to active duty. Research stations that had studied peaceful applications of technology received new mandates to develop weapons capable of matching the attacker's destructive power. Humanity's scientific establishment turned from exploration to war. President Williams addressed the species from the steps of the Global Assembly Building. Behind her stood the flags of every human world, including New Terra's banner that now bore a black border of mourning. "We have been shown what mercy means to our enemies," she said, her words broadcast to billions of listeners. "We will show them what justice means to us." The survivors of New Terra became symbols of humanity's loss and determination. Maria traveled to Earth to testify before military planners about the attack's details. She described how the aliens had waited until children were gathered in open areas before striking, how their weapons had been calibrated to cause maximum casualties among the youngest victims. Her testimony influenced weapon development and tactical planning for the response that was already taking shape. David remained on New Terra to oversee the colony's rebuilding, but the new construction focused on military installations rather than homes and schools. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons, while underground bunkers provided shelter for the few families who chose to stay. The peaceful settlement had become a fortress, its remaining inhabitants bound together by shared grief and growing anger. Ships arrived daily with supplies and personnel, but these were warships and soldiers rather than the cargo vessels and colonists of earlier years. New Terra transformed into a forward military base where human forces could stage operations deeper into unexplored space. The aliens had chosen their target well, but they had failed to consider how their actions would change their victims. Military engineers studied the wreckage of destroyed buildings to understand the attacker's weapons. The energy signatures indicated technology more advanced than anything humanity possessed, but the aliens had revealed their capabilities through their brutality. Human scientists began developing countermeasures while weapons designers created new systems intended to overwhelm any defense the enemy might deploy. The memorial grew larger as survivors added personal mementos to honor their lost children. Toys and drawings, school projects, and birthday gifts accumulated around the stone monument. Visitors from other worlds brought flowers and left messages of support, but the survivors needed more than sympathy. They needed the promise that such an attack would never happen again. Maria's final broadcast from New Terra carried a message that reached every human settlement. "Our children died because we believed the universe was vast enough for all species to coexist peacefully," she said, standing before the memorial as wind rustled through the offerings left by mourning parents. "We were wrong. Some creatures understand only strength, and they will receive exactly what they comprehend." The last ship to leave New Terra before the military buildup began carried civilian evacuees who could not bear to remain on the world where their children had died. They scattered to other colonies, carrying stories of the massacre and fueling the anger that was building throughout human space. Their grief became the foundation for the war machine that was already taking shape in shipyards and laboratories across dozens of worlds. Admiral Thomas Kane studied the tactical display aboard the flagship Vengeance as 2,000 human warships assembled in formation beyond New Terra's orbit. The Armada represented the largest military force humanity had ever deployed, built, with technology that pushed the boundaries of known science. Quantum torpedoes, nanite swarms, and fusion lances filled the weapon bays while enhanced shields and armor protected ships. Designed for total war, intelligence reports had identified the attackers as the hegemony, a reptilian species that controlled 17 star systems in the sector beyond human space. Their society was built on the belief that other races existed only to serve their expansion, making diplomacy impossible and conflict inevitable. The massacre at New Terra had been their attempt to halt human expansion through terror and intimidation. The fleet's composition reflected humanity's transformation from peaceful explorers to instruments of vengeance. Heavy battleships mounted weapons capable of cracking planets while smaller destroyers carried specialized equipment for hunting enemy vessels. Support ships transported the resources needed for extended operations in hostile space, ensuring the Armada could sustain itself far from human territory. Kane had earned his reputation during the border conflicts with pirates and rogue elements that occasionally threatened human shipping. The quiet, methodical officer had never commanded forces larger than a squadron, but his tactical genius and unwavering determination made him the obvious choice to lead humanity's response. His orders were simple and absolute: find the enemy and eliminate them completely. The first target was Crimson Gate, a hegemony world that served as their primary border outpost. Intelligence suggested the base housed 300 enemy ships and 50,000 military personnel who monitored human expansion and planned future attacks. The system's destruction would announce humanity's arrival in hegemony space while providing valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities. David Reed commanded the destroyer Retribution, one of 50 ships assigned to the advance guard that would engage enemy forces while the main fleet positioned itself for the primary assault. His crew consisted of volunteers from New Terra and other colonies that had lost population to hegemony raids. They shared a common bond forged in grief and tempered by the promise of justice for their murdered children. The journey to Crimson Gate took 3 weeks through hyperspace lanes that human scouts had mapped during previous exploration missions. The fleet traveled in complete communication silence, using coded signals to coordinate movements while maintaining the element of surprise. Long-range sensors detected no enemy activity along their route, suggesting the hegemony had not anticipated retaliation on such a massive scale. Jump calculations were verified multiple times before the fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Crimson Gate system. Human sensors immediately detected the enemy presence. 273 warships arranged in defensive formations around the primary world and its 3 moons. Orbital stations bristled with weapons while planetary shields glowed faintly in the system's red sunlight. Kane issued his orders without hesitation. The human fleet advanced in a formation designed to maximize firepower while minimizing the enemy's ability to concentrate their defensive efforts. Quantum torpedoes launched first, their warheads capable of destabilizing matter at the subatomic level. The weapons crossed the vast distance between fleets in minutes, their targeting systems locked onto enemy signatures. The hegemony ships responded with their own weapons, energy beams that had reduced New Terra's buildings to ash and vapor. Their technology was advanced, but human engineers had studied the wreckage from the colony attack and developed countermeasures. Enhanced shields deflected most incoming fire, while point defense systems destroyed missiles before they could reach their targets. David's destroyer engaged a hegemony cruiser that attempted to flank the human advance. The Retribution's fusion lances carved through enemy armor like paper, while nanite swarms infiltrated damaged sections to destroy critical systems from within. The alien ship died in a flash of expanding plasma as its reactor containment failed, taking 300 crew members into the void. The battle raged for 6 hours as human forces systematically dismantled the hegemony defense fleet. Superior numbers and advanced technology gave the attackers overwhelming advantages, but individual enemy ships fought with desperate courage as they realized the scope of humanity's response. None of them had expected such massive retaliation. For what they considered a minor police action, Kane ordered the bombardment of Crimson Gate itself once the orbital defenses were eliminated. Fusion lances and quantum torpedoes rained down on military installations while nanite swarms consumed enemy equipment and infrastructure. The planetary shields collapsed under sustained assault, leaving the surface defenseless against human fury that had been building for months. The survivors who escaped the planetary bombardment were captured and interrogated for intelligence about hegemony, military capabilities, and territorial organization. Human officers extracted star charts, communication codes, and tactical data that would guide future operations. The prisoners were then executed in accordance with the new rules of engagement that made no provision for mercy toward child killers. Crimson Gate became humanity's first forward operating base in enemy territory. Engineers landed within hours of the bombardment to begin converting captured facilities for human use. The world's factories were retooled to produce ammunition and spare parts, while communication arrays were modified to serve as relay stations for the advancing fleet. Supreme Commander Voss received reports of the attack aboard his flagship in the Hegemony home system. The loss of Crimson Gate was catastrophic, but the scale of human retaliation shocked him more than the tactical defeat. Intelligence had suggested the young species lacked the military capacity for major operations. Yet they had fielded a fleet larger than the Hegemony's entire navy, Kane transmitted a message to all Hegemony worlds as the human fleet prepared to advance deeper into enemy space. The broadcast showed footage from New Terra's aftermath, images of dead children and grieving parents that had motivated humanity's war effort. "You taught us that children are legitimate targets," the Admiral said, his voice cold with controlled fury. "We are simply better students than you expected." The hunt continued as human forces advanced through Hegemony space, overwhelming each defensive position with mathematical precision. 6 star systems fell in rapid succession as the alien military structure collapsed under sustained assault. Millions of Hegemony personnel died in battles they could not win. Their advanced technology insufficient against humanity's superior numbers and tactical coordination, Voss attempted to negotiate after losing half his territory, broadcasting offers of reparations and territorial concessions that might end the human advance. His messages were received but never answered as Kane's fleet continued its methodical destruction of everything the Hegemony had built. The time for diplomacy had ended when the first energy beam struck New Terra's playground, the final Hegemony stronghold lay ahead, their home system where the remaining fleet would make its last stand. 200 warships guarded the world where their civilization had begun, protected by orbital fortresses and planetary shields that represented their most advanced defensive technology. The battle would determine whether the species that murdered human children would survive to threaten future generations. The Hegemony home system of Drakmor appeared on Admiral Kane's tactical display as a fortress of desperate determination. 800 enemy warships formed defensive rings around their homeworld, while massive orbital stations projected shields that could withstand planetary bombardment. This was where the reptilian species had evolved and built their first cities, the sacred center of an empire that had terrorized weaker races for centuries. Supreme Commander Voss positioned his remaining forces with the skill of a veteran warrior who understood he faced extinction. The strongest ships held the inner perimeter while lighter vessels formed screening formations designed to blunt the human advance. Planetary defense platforms emerged from hidden locations on Drakmor's moons, their weapons trained on the hyperspace emergence points where the human fleet would appear. Kane's armada had grown to 3,000 vessels as reinforcements arrived from human space, bringing fresh crews and advanced weapons developed during the months of warfare. The new quantum disruptors could tear apart molecular bonds, while improved fusion lances generated enough energy to melt asteroid-sized chunks of matter. Humanity's industrial capacity had focused entirely on building tools of destruction, the human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, appearing simultaneously at multiple points around the Drakmor system to prevent the enemy from concentrating their defensive fire. Kane had studied hegemony tactics throughout the campaign, learning their patterns and preferences until he could predict their responses with mathematical precision. The reptilian military mind was disciplined but inflexible, unable to adapt quickly to unexpected strategies. David Reed's destroyer Retribution led the third wave attack against Drakmor's outer moon, where hegemony commanders had positioned their heavy artillery. The weapons platforms had been carved into the satellite's surface, protected by kilometers of rock and metal that should have made them invulnerable to conventional assault. Human engineers had developed specialized penetrator warheads that could burrow through solid matter before detonating. The battle began with long-range exchanges, as both fleets tested each other's defensive capabilities. Hegemony energy beams lanced across the void while human quantum torpedoes carved paths of destruction through enemy formations. The aliens fought with the courage of a species defending their birth world. But courage alone could not overcome the technological and numerical advantages their enemies had assembled. Dr. Maria Santos observed the battle from the fleet's command vessel, her role as xenobiologist requiring her to monitor enemy communications and verify the completion of extinction protocols. She had volunteered for the mission despite having no military training, driven by the need to witness justice for her murdered daughters. The woman who had once taught children about peaceful exploration now calculated casualty figures with clinical detachment. Voss led a desperate charge against the human center, hoping to break through their formation and reach the command ships where enemy leaders directed the assault. His flagship's weapons carved through two human destroyers before concentrated. Fire overwhelmed his shields and began tearing apart his vessel's hull. The Supreme Commander died at his command station, clutching tactical displays that showed his civilization's final moments. The hegemony defense lines collapsed after 18 hours of continuous combat. Human forces had lost 97 ships, while destroying 600 enemy vessels and all orbital fortifications. The survivors fled toward Drakmor's surface, seeking shelter behind planetary shields that flickered under the strain of maintaining protection against an overwhelming assault. Kane ordered the final bombardment as human ships took positions above Drakmor's major population centers. The Admiral's orders were specific and uncompromising. Every military installation, government facility, and industrial complex was to be destroyed. The species that had murdered children would not survive to threaten future generations of human families. Fusion lances struck Drakmor's surface with the force of miniature stars, carving through planetary shields and vaporizing everything beneath. Cities that had stood for millennia disappeared in flashes of superheated plasma, while gnat swarms consumed the remains of hegemony civilization. The bombardment continued for 6 hours, ensuring that nothing could survive the systematic destruction. David guided his ship's weapons against a cluster of enemy structures that intelligence had identified as military academies where young hegemony officers learned their trade. The buildings vanished in expanding fireballs that reminded him of the playground where his daughter Emma had died. Each detonation brought a small measure of satisfaction. Justice delivered with mathematical precision. The planetary bombardment revealed the true scope of human fury that had been building since the massacre at New Terra. Weapons designed to crack asteroids carved continents into molten slag, while atmospheric processors reversed their normal function to strip away Drakmor's breathable air. The world that had given birth to humanity's enemies became a monument to the consequences of targeting human children. Maria confirmed the extinction protocols were complete as her instruments detected the elimination of all major population centers. The hegemony government had ceased to exist along with their military command structure and industrial capacity. Scattered survivors might hide in underground shelters, but they lacked the resources or organization to rebuild their civilization or threaten human expansion. Kane broadcast humanity's final message to any hegemony survivors as the fleet prepared to depart the ruined system. "Your species chose to murder our children," he said, His words transmitted on all frequencies while images of Drakmor's destruction filled the background. You have learned that some actions carry consequences beyond your ability to endure or escape. The human fleet established automated monitoring stations throughout the Drakmor system before withdrawing to the outer edge of former hegemony space. The devices would prevent any survivors from rebuilding while serving as warnings to other species that might consider threatening human colonies. Advanced sensors would detect any attempt to reconstruct military capabilities or develop weapons that could threaten Earth's children. Other alien civilizations had monitored the war through long-range sensors and communication intercepts, watching as humanity systematically dismantled a species that had dominated their region for generations. The swift and total destruction of the hegemony sent a clear message about human capabilities and intentions. Diplomatic relations with the expanding human colonies took on new dimensions of respect and caution. The surviving hegemony worlds in distant systems received automated broadcasts describing their species, fate, and humanity's role in delivering justice for murdered children. The messages included detailed scans of Drakmor's destruction along with warnings that any attempt to seek revenge would result in similar consequences. Most survivors chose exile to uncharted space rather than risk further contact with their children's killers. Kane stood alone on his flagship's observation deck as the human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Drakmor system to eternal silence. Behind them lay the ashes of a civilization that had underestimated the protective instincts of the species they had attacked. The Admiral carried no regret for the destruction he had orchestrated, only satisfaction that justice had been delivered with appropriate severity. The war was over, but its lessons would echo through the galaxy for generations. Humanity had demonstrated that their peaceful expansion masked capabilities for total warfare when their children were threatened. The species that explored distant stars in search of new homes would also pursue vengeance across any distance to protect their young from those who would do them harm. 5 years had passed since the last hegemony ship died above their burning homeworld, and Admiral Thomas Kane walked slowly through the memorial garden that now covered the exact spot where Haven Valley's playground had once echoed with children's laughter. 12,000 white stones formed perfect rows across the carefully tended grounds, each one bearing the name of a child who would never grow up to explore the stars. Their parents had claimed the memorial had become the most visited sight in human space, drawing pilgrims from colonies scattered across dozens of worlds. Families brought their own children to see the stones and understand the price of the freedom they enjoyed. Young parents held babies close while reading names carved in granite, promising their infants that such a tragedy would never happen. AGA Dr. Maria Santos oversaw the memorial's daily operations from a small office built into the hillside above the garden. Her role as Director of Colonial Defense had evolved from grief counselor to strategic planner, ensuring that humanity's expanding civilization remained protected by the lessons learned from their darkest hour. The woman who had once taught children about peaceful exploration now coordinated defenses against any species that might threaten human families. David Reed commanded the garrison fleet that protected New Terra from his flagship orbiting high above the memorial world. 24 warships maintained constant patrol while automated defense platforms monitored every approach to the system. The peaceful colony had become a fortress, its surviving inhabitants bound together by shared memory and the determination to honor their lost children through vigilance. The galaxy had changed in fundamental ways since humanity's war of extermination against the hegemony. Other alien species approached human colonies with careful respect, their diplomats trained to avoid any actions that might be interpreted as threats against civilian populations. Trade agreements included specific clauses protecting human children, while military treaties acknowledged humanity's willingness to pursue total warfare when their families were endangered. New Terra's population had grown again as families moved to the memorial world to tend the garden and serve in the defense forces. Children played in parks built away from the sacred ground where their predecessors had died, but their games were different now. They played soldiers in spaceship battles, preparing for conflicts their parents hoped would never come while understanding the responsibilities that came with being human in a dangerous universe. Kane visited the memorial regularly during his inspection tours of the outer colonies. The Admiral had become humanity's most respected military leader, his methodical destruction of an entire species serving as both warning and promise to any who might threaten human expansion. He walked among the stones reading names he had memorized, children whose deaths had justified the extinction of their killers. The automated monitoring stations around the former hegemony worlds continued their silent watch, ensuring that no remnant of the species could rebuild the capability to threaten human children. Occasional signals from distant systems suggested that some survivors had escaped to uncharted regions, but they posed no threat to the expanding human civilization that had learned to defend itself with absolute ruthlessness. Maria often found parents sitting beside specific stones, talking quietly to children who could no longer hear their voices. She had done the same during the first years after the massacre, sharing daily news with Anne and Beth as if they might still be listening from somewhere beyond the memorial garden. The practice had helped her process grief while building the determination that drove humanity's defensive preparations. Other species studied the hegemony war through historical records and battlefield archaeology, trying to understand how a peaceful exploration mission had transformed into the complete extinction of an advanced civilization. The swift and total nature of humanity's response had shocked galactic observers who expected limited retaliation rather than systematic annihilation. The lesson was clear: human children were not legitimate targets under any circumstances. The Memorial Garden hosted an annual ceremony marking the anniversary of the New Terra massacre. Representatives from every human colony attended, along with carefully selected alien diplomats who needed to understand the event that had shaped humanity's approach to interstellar relations. The service always ended with the reading of every child's name, a ritual that took 3 hours but held the attention of audiences who understood its significance. David's daily routine included walking through the memorial at sunset, when the light cast long shadows across the white stones and created patterns that reminded visitors of playgrounds and schoolyards. He stopped at Emma's marker each evening, placing a small flower from the colony's gardens while sharing memories of the daughter who had dreamed of becoming a starship captain. The expansion of human civilization continued at an accelerated pace. As new colonies were established throughout the sector once controlled by the hegemony, advanced defensive systems protected every settlement, while rapid response fleets could reach any threatened world within days. The protective infrastructure had been built with resources extracted from dead hegemony worlds, their former oppressors' technology repurposed to safeguard human families. Kane's final report on the hegemony war had become required reading at military academies throughout human space. The document described tactical lessons and strategic principles, but its conclusion focused on the moral imperative that drove humanity's transformation from peaceful explorers to implacable defenders. Some lines, once crossed, lead only to extinction, he had written. We are the species that draws those lines in the blood of our children. The memorial garden attracted visitors from other species who sought to understand humanity's protective instincts and the consequences of triggering them. Alien anthropologists studied the site while their governments developed new protocols for interacting with human colonies. The message was universally understood: threaten human children and face the complete destruction of everything you have built. Maria's evening broadcasts to the human colonies included updates on defensive preparations and reminders of the vigilance required to protect expanding civilization. Her words carried the authority of someone who had witnessed the worst that could happen when humanity's guard was lowered. We explore, we build, we dream, she concluded each transmission. But we also remember and we prepare. The white stones caught the first light of dawn as another day began on New Terra. Maintenance crews tended the gardens, while security patrols checked the perimeter defenses that surrounded the memorial site. Children's voices could be heard from the new residential areas, but they remained distant from the sacred ground where their predecessors had died and been avenged. Kane stood at the memorial's highest point as the sun reached its zenith, looking out over the stones that marked humanity's darkest hour and greatest lesson. The Admiral's presence served as a living reminder that the species which mourned its children with such dedication would also pursue vengeance with equal determination. The galaxy had learned to respect both sides of humanity's nature. The final message inscribed on the memorial's central monument captured the essence of what the New Terra massacre had taught humanity about survival in a dangerous universe. We are human, we explore, we build, we dream. But if you harm our children, we will end your species. This is not a threat. This is a promise carved in stone and written in the ashes of those who learned too late. The words would endure as long as humans walked among the stars, protecting future generations through the memory of those who had died to teach them the price of vulnerability.